It goes like this. Sorry to turn silent, such time that does it, a river over something, grass and some stones. I want to continue. And it's lineated this way, and I hope that everybody has a copy because we've sent links out quite a lot the last few days. Okay, Kelly, what's your first thought as you read it?
The first thing that strikes me is the way the title is spaced, because like the SORY are like there's like extra space between each letter, which like with like my first impression of poem, there's a lot of sense of like gaining, trying to have voice or not having voice, and then it almost seems like the sorry is like an attempt to like create voice or like enunciating each like letter on the page.
Wow.
So that's the spacing is
great
what gets
start.
me.
And also that sorry is a hesitant sorry because it sort of comes out in a difficult way. Yeah. And before we turn to Irene, Anna, what is it like to enter a conversation of any kind with the word sorry?
Do it all the time.
We do, don't we? And what does it mean?
It's an apology for like your very presence or your very like intrusion. Sometimes it's like a pardon me, I need to interrupt you for a second because I have to tell you this important thing. Sometimes it's like this weird apology thing we do, like apologizing for even speaking when like you have just as much of a right to speak or be in that conversation as anybody else. But people so often feel the need to apologize for just like being a person.
It can be used ironically. I hope nobody here does it ironically, but it's pretty rude to do.
Yeah.
It. Sorry, like what you're saying is nonsense, and
it's like saying like no offense, but
yeah. But I don't think that Larry Eigner's using it that way.
No.
Irene, what is your first thought about this?
Yeah, I will take not the first one, but the first word, but the last one maybe, because it's very interesting to me to end the poem with this. I want to continue and continue specifically like. It's the end, but the intention is to continue. So it's like there's silence, but somehow the word and the poem is still there. So yeah, it's probably linked with this, what Kelly said, like this title where we don't know if we want to have silence or a voice, we want to end or we want to continue. There's like everything in there.
Yeah.
That's what struck me.
That's terrific. What a great point. I want to continue, Lily, it's not a new thing to end a poem with a kind of continuation. But let's say what it means to do such a thing in a poem.
Well, you when you said before, like sometimes starting a conversation with sorry can be ironic, and then it can be rude, but I think it can also be ironic in a non-rude way, because if you say sorry, that usually means I'm going to stop what I'm doing, right? Like, sorry, and I won't do it again, or like, sorry, I made a mistake, and the implication, like, then it won't continue. But like, there is irony here, but I just don't think that it's like mean irony or like funny irony. It's just an irony of like the opposite things being put together. So like the end being continue, like Irene said, or beginning with sorry, which should sort of be an ending. So, there's a cyclical energy to it. There's also because of the formatting, I find it very haunting. Like I want to continue like a ghost or something like that.
Yeah. I want to turn to Jeremy and Ray to say something about what happens after sorry, because sorry doesn't stand alone. Really, grammatically, what the speaker is sorry about is having turned silent, right? So I guess, Jeremy, I'll start with you. Just in normal social, everyday interaction, what would that mean? I mean, if somebody came up to you and said to you, Jeremy, I'm sorry, I went silent there. What does that usually mean?
Kind of implies they're not happy, something's happened, perhaps it's been a conversation that suddenly stopped, an argument, not having the right words to continue.
Right. So a kind of an awkwardness. Someone is apologizing for not
Awkward.
for breaking off the conversation or something like that.
Well, you can, but also it's also rather passive aggressive, isn't it? It's kind of like, sorry, but listen to me,
Yeah.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
And especially that drawn out sorry. It's like sorry, it's like a real kind of plea to listen, really.
Yeah. Well, before we turn to Ray on this, we'll just throw in the biographical fact that I think everybody knows about the amazing Larry Eigner. Complications in birth, maybe, and also a congenital condition, which they described as cerebral palsy, but it was kind of a general diagnosis, general description, really, of his incapacity. Great limitations in mobility for Larry. In the end, he was able to, I think his parents bought him a typewriter, and he was able, in the end, to use one finger of one hand to type. He got around with great difficulty. He lived in Massachusetts for years and then daringly moved out to live independently in San Francisco and became, at the end of his life, at the end of his career, a great senior mentor pal of so many of the young poets who were coming up, including almost all of the language poets who were out there. Sorry, the way it's figured here, is kind of the way Larry sounded. And in fact, the lineation also, in a way, is so Larry Eigner. This is not a very loquacious poet like Ezra Pound, who could just talk forever and talk lucidly, well, not lucidly, but could talk straight through, and then do the cantos in this kind of pretend halting thing. For Larry, this was about the space bar, the tab bar, and hammering at words, chiseling. So with that information, Ray, would you just sort of riff a little bit on whether you see disability at all, immobility at all in the way this poem says what it says? It's a tough question, Ray.
Sure. No, I was thinking about the typewriter before you gave that information. I didn't realize that was the case. But as I looked at the poem, at the structure of the poem, I considered that he typed sorry with spaces between each letter. Then he hit line return. Then he hit an indent or a tab. Then he hit a space because it's not lined up. And he proceeds with the reason why he's sorry, to turn silent. But then there's another space. It's almost as if there's more to say, but he's not going to give it to us just yet.
Yeah.
Then the next line, there's space between the words as well.
Yeah.
So the structure of the poem is definitely a function of the mechanics of typing this particular poem without even knowing that he was confined to, or that he used a typewriter with one finger. You can see a kind of haltiness in the way he kind of spat the words out.
Yes, that's really great. So what I want to do is repeat the phone number and also ask Claire if there's some people who are asking some questions. And then I want to turn to Magdalena and Mandana to try to figure out how we make the transition from the apology for silence or the interruption of what might have been an ongoing conversation to the natural description, which we get in the second part. If you put your hand over the top and your finger over the last line, you get a kind of pure imagist poem in a way. Observation, a river over something, grass and some stones. This is so Eigner, so I'm curious to know what the two of you think. Lily, what possible advantage could be derived from a person turning silent and focusing on something else? In a social, there's an implied social relationship because the speaker is talking to someone, even if it's just the readers, but more likely some, assumed person. But we think of that as a negative thing. Oh, you weren't paying attention. But what possible positive thing could that be? Could that signal?
There's a lot, I think we do a lot of praising of indirectness in ModPo, which is ironic. Well, I don't know why we're using that word a lot. I mean me, are using that word a lot today. But it's ironic that such a short poem can have indirectness because it's so short. But yeah, if your goal is to get from A to B in a poem, sometimes it's more expedient to soft focus on B, but wander around until you eventually get there. Just because you were missing details, you were turning to poetry to communicate something that couldn't be communicated with more conventional, like direct linear conversation. You know, poets could have a lot of reasons for wanting to wander a bit more and turn silent and turn their focus away from the main thing that they're supposed to be looking at.
So Mandana and Magdalena, let's try to understand that brilliant, precise, imagistic description of nature. How does it work, Mandana? Phil gave us a nice start on that.
Well, part of the thing about this poem that I love so much is that it is visual as much as it is verbal. And I was thinking of, oh gosh, it's William Carlos Williams, the No Ideas But in Things. And this really, there's only one pronoun that he throws in at the end, but it is all about the things and very simple things over a sense of narration or clarity. It's this inexactitude is actually a way of letting all of us into the poem.
And what do you think about something, a river over something? A poet that's being that precise usually won't settle for something.
And then right below it is some stones. And I think that's, you know, when you said imagism, but as much as it might have some imagistic parameters to it, he's not letting it be an imagistic poem.
Not at all.
Not at all. So I think that if she's painting a picture, you see kind of the sharp line of the tree, but you might not see all the leaves. And that's kind of a profound thing when you think about how hard it is for him to have put all this stuff on paper and to make it look as well as sound like what it is.
That's a really smart observation you made a minute ago about how this might seem to be imagistic and concrete and precise, but actually Larry Eigner is not interested in that. He sometimes will write a poem in which the nature he can see from his window, from his room in his building, will get in there very precisely. But this is more of a kind of dream. Like Phil was saying, there's a certain exhaustion, a playing out of the role of the poet here, a disabled poet who works hard at getting things across. And then there's this dream. Just give me a river over something. Like, it's a kind of generic dream, grass and some stones. In other words, I want to go to some place where, and it's not precise. It's got this idealistic.
That makes a lot of sense with what you just said. You just use the phrase to get something across.
Yeah, something.
Right?
Yeah.
And what's happening here is we have this river over something.
Over something.
The imprecision is actually being enacted in the imprecision of the language.
It's super precise because the idea that a river can be flowing over something, well, typically, of course, river will flow. We're not talking about a river flowing over a highway underneath. It's usually the other way around, right? So this is a river that flows over grass or stones, right? So,
Al?
Yeah.
Can I interject something from what you said a lot earlier?
Yeah.
If we're looking at Eigner as also a disabled poet, he may not have seen a lot of rivers and he certainly didn't walk over stones. So this, in a sense, is this, as you put it, this idealistic dream of something that he may never get to, but he imagines being there.
Let's finish our conversation about this poem with the last line, which we talked about a little bit earlier. I want to continue. It's such a giant thing to say at the end of a short poem. Can you try to just translate it? Just paraphrase it in several different ways? Just riff? What does it mean?
Yeah, he gives us a few different possible, like, in poem meanings of what continue could be. Like, it could be the conversation, it could be the friendship, like, sorry, I turned silent, I want to continue our friendship.
Right.
It could be a conversation, like, I want to continue the conversation. It's kind of a common phrase. he gives us a river, and so we can't help but think of rivers and continue, this sort of
Flow,
trite
flowing
thing of
on.
like you can't step in the same river twice, whatever, like it's continuing to flow. And then also, of course, like we talked about before, it's the end of the poem, so it could be I want to continue, but I can't, or I want to continue, but I'm out of ink. It could be many different things.
Right. What I'd like to do now is ask everyone, including Claire, everyone, to say something very brief about that powerful last line, and then we'll go on to our next poem. So let's start with Irene, something, just anything brief about what I want to continue means to you when you get to it.
For me, it's an intention. It's like a desire. It's a correct intention.
Yeah. In a Samuel Beckett sort of way, I can't go on, so I'll go on. And that's very...
I start by saying sorry, talking about silence, and no, I want to continue.
Yeah,
So
I'm
for me,
ready.
that-
I'm going to do it. I'm going to try. It shows a tremendous spirit, it seems to me. Jeremy, quick thought on the last line.
I think it relates to the poem continuing as well. It's like the poem is the flow. It's not just the poet. It's the words on the page. So it's almost like the poem saying, I'm flowing. I'm going to carry on. There's
Yes.
more for me to say.
Yes, that's beautifully put. I take it as heroic. I have the 4-volume Larry Eigner, all the poems they could find, and they're reproduced in this non-proportional font. It's a Courier font. And just like a typewriter, although it's not exactly, holograph or anything. And there's so much space around the poems. And I want to continue suggests, there's 2,000 more poems in these 4 volumes. So this is like a meta poem in the sense of I'm clearing my throat, taking a little break, failing to communicate, but I'm ready to go on, read the other 1,000 poems. Thank you, Jeremy. Kelly, a quick thought on I want to continue.
I think I have like two thoughts. One of them is sort of like he was naming like a river over and then grass and some stones, something grass and some stones is almost like I want to continue to talk about, to list more things or point out or name more things and continue that sort of imaginary landscape. And then the other thing is, I think for me, the fact that I was used for the first time in the poem, there almost seems like the I wants to continue to exist and to continue into being.
Terrific. Mandana, final thought on this?
I'm perhaps most taken with both the use of a pronoun and a verb. The fact that he's naming himself finally within this poem, which heretofore really doesn't have a person. And the want is a very powerful word. That sort of human desire that, again, is nowhere near this poem up to that point.
Terrific. Thank you. Ray Maxwell, final thought on I want to continue.
I think it's a very humanistic need to not want to stop, to want to continue. And the question that I wrote in the margin is, does he want to continue this conversation? Does he want to continue this life? Does he want a continuation just in general? And I think that the final option is the one that as human beings, we want things to go on and on and on and on.
Yes, very well put. Claire, your thought on this line?
I definitely read it, especially knowing his disability, that he wants to continue despite his struggles. And in comparison to the lines, like a river over something, grass and some stones, like the river flows despite what's underneath it, despite the obstacles. So I read it as I want to continue despite what is challenging me.
Yeah, that's great. If we divided the poem into 2, which is the halting, hesitation, the sorry that can't quite get typed out, and then following that, the flow and continuation with the river, so that he's centered by the nature and he's ready to flow like a river rather than the guy who has just one finger to use on a typewriter. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of transcendence is an unfair word to use in the case of disability. That's not the word. But working the quirk, I guess, would be a way to think about it. Figuring out how to make flow from this limitation. Anna?
I keep thinking about I want to continue in relation to the sorry, whether we read that as a title or as a first line, because I'm thinking about the ways that so often people who have disabilities or face challenges, whatever it is, whether you have like a food allergy limitation or a mobility disability, so often feel the need to apologize for their bodies and so often feel the need to say, I'm sorry, I need to use a ramp, or I'm sorry, I can't eat this food, or like whatever it is. And this wanting to continue is such a way to end that. It's like, I'm sorry, but I'm actually not apologizing for myself. I want to continue.
Right.
You're going to keep reading this poem, and you're going to read the next poem in my 4,000
Right.
volume or poem volume.
No, you're totally right about that. That's great.